moderated today on Roundtable. I want to thank you for your participation to make this virtual Roundtable possible. Later, all of you will start to present your views on the theme of the impact of COVID-19 on globalization, economic trade development, and democratic freedoms. Now I would like to introduce Honorable Yao Yingqi, President of WLFD, Honorable Zheng Yongquan, APLFD Council Chairman, Mr. Peter Lee, Secretary General, APLFD Secretariat, Mr. Simon Hu, Deputy Secretary General, Honorable Tina Rose Muna, Bobbies, Vice Speaker, Guan Legislator, Honorable Manju Jia, Member of the Parliament of India, Mr. Simon O'Connor, Member of the House of Representatives, New Zealand, Mr. Zhang Ban, Vice Chairman, APLFD Myanmar Chapter, Mr. Nagin, APLFD Fiji Chapter, Mr. Joseph Xu, Chairman, APLFD Guam Chapter, Ms. Ramia, Chairperson, APLFD Indian Chapter, Datu Muhammad Najib bin Abdullah, Vice President of APLFD Malaysia Chapter, Mr. Hishasi, Executive Committee Member, APLFD Japan Chapter, Mr. David Pras Kusan, Vice President WLFD Nepal Chapter, John Wood, Vice Chairman, APLFD New Zealand Chapter, Ms. San Diego, APL Philippines Chapter. How are you, everybody? And as you are aware that after the Level 3 alert of COVID-19 was lifted on August 5th by the Central Epidemic Command Center of Taiwan and made the number of crowd gathering, including on-site technicians, were easing up to 50, thus made the virtual roundtable feasible on September 10th. We apologize all of your inconveniences. The impacts of the pandemic were comprehensive. First, vaccine inequality. Governments are in affluent countries partnered with pharmaceutical companies, pouring in numerous amounts of money to procure materials, financial, clinic trial, and retrofit factories, and committed to buy the finished products. However, those countries' success has not only created stock inequity, but to waive intellectual property rights for the vaccine. Second, unsure future in global economy. Substantial job growth could still take a longer time. Prospects remain green for the meaningful recovery. Hopefully, next year, industries face the great challenges are lower skilled labors. It is unclear so-called economic V-shaped resuscitate easy as they are on and off switch. Third, challenge for democracy after COVID-19 and impact on democracy in the world. When political leaders met with defiance for the sake of convenience or for a quick response to impose lockdown measures, limiting personal freedom and civil liberty, including freedom and movement, enterprises, assembly, etc., has been severely restricted. Democratic way of life was also curtailed. Furthermore, the rise of populist and nationalist movement, no matter in developed or developing countries, will create another severe challenge to democracy and freedom. People even misunderstood that authoritarianism is the best regime for the considering efficiencies. Now I would like to have to introduce Honorable Yao Yingqi makes remarks or deliver a speech. Mr. Yao, please.
亚盟理事会曾主席、关岛议会副议长巴纳斯女士、欧洲国会参议员齐青女士、纽西兰国会议员欧康纳先生、亚盟各国峰会会长、主席 副会长、副主席、秘书长，以及在电脑和手机前收看本次视讯会议的各位女士、先生，大家午安，大家好。
Honorable APLFD Council Chairman Teng Yongchuan, Honorable Tina Rose Munam Barnes, Honorable Major Kumar Jha, Mr. Simon O'Connor, APLFD Chapter President, Chairman, Vice President, and Vice Chairman, Secretary General, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon, everyone.
本人很高兴，也很荣幸，能够代表世盟总会，再次应邀前来参加亚盟1年1度的亚太圆桌会议。我们知道，自从2019年底新冠肺炎疫情爆发以来，经过1年多的日子，病毒迅速扩张，世界各国染疫情形日益严重，短时之内就夺去许多人的身体健康，甚至生命，实在令人触目惊心。后来我们看到各国政府被迫下令封城锁国，公司行号停止歇业，新闻络绎不绝，人民行动自由因而受到极大的限制。为配合政府防疫，被迫合理化自己的心态，去接受抗疫大旗，造成基本人民权利受到损害。因此，去年世盟基于职责所在，曾与亚盟携手合作，分别召开各地区视讯会议，呼吁各国政府切勿借此情形成威权和民粹主义，产生侵害和忽视自由、民主与人权的地方。后来所幸各国有识之士持续关注与支持，迄今尚未听闻有任何政府假借疫情进一步严重迫害人民的消息传出，实在值得令人欣慰。
On behalf of the World League of Freedom and Democracy, it is my great privilege and honor again to speak in 2021 Asia Pacific Virtual Roundtable. Thank you, Chairman Zheng, for your kind invitation. As we all are aware now, because of the outbreak of COVID-19 pandemic in very late 2019, the rapid spread of the coronavirus around the world, after 1 year and 8 months, has caused the pandemic even more severe. It is so scary to see that the health and even lives of millions of people have been taken away in a very short time. News about isolation and infected with lockdown of cities and the borders have been heard quite often. The freedom of movement has been restricted in a great deal. People are inclined to avoid her fundamental human rights, to follow the rules of government to keep their lives safe. Sometimes it is even worse that people are forced to justify themselves, to acknowledge the totalitarianism or populism, to accept rules of government that violate human rights under the cover flag for pandemic prevention. Therefore, to fulfill the duties of the WLFD, we worked together with APLFD last year to host several continental video roundtables to appeal government around the world not to become the totalitarian or populist, to damage the fundamental human rights. However, thanks to the concerns and support of those who care about the event, we were happy to see that no further news about government using pandemic prevention as an excuse to oppress its people had been reported.
今天我们很高兴，亚盟各国峰会能够再度与世盟总会携手合作，就新冠肺炎疫情对全球化的冲击、经贸发展与自由民主的议题来举行圆桌会议。本人表示热烈的欢迎，并感谢各位贵宾及亚太地区爱好自由民主人士的热情参与与贡献。期望各位与会贵宾提出高瞻远瞩的见解与建议，以解燃眉之急。
Today, to regard the impact of economic globalization, the WLFD is glad to work with APLFD to hold the 2021 Asia Pacific Virtual Roundtable to discuss the COVID-19 and its impacts on economic trade, development in globalization, and democratic freedoms. I sincerely welcome you and all Asia Pacific freedom-loving friends to join the meeting, and I appreciate your eager participation and contribution. I firmly believe under the cooperation of WLFD and APLFD, we will keep on working together to fight for universal values, freedom, democracy, human rights. Moreover, we will appeal to all governments around the world to fully support to restore the global trade and exploit their domestic market to satisfy the need of livelihood of their own people.
本人同时在此呼吁，今日疫情发展已经严重到不能自扫门前的地步，我们要促请欧美大国勇敢地站出来，共同承担国际领导者角色，结合并善用联合国组织及联合国手下非政府组织一起动起来，分配疫苗给世界各国，共同订定全球防疫大计划，同时要与世界卫生组织合作，共同公平地分配疫苗给世界各国，并联合慷慨捐赠及疫苗给贫穷弱势国家和地区，以达全球免疫效果，有效控制疫情，恢复从前日常生活。这才是经济复苏、国际经贸体系顺利运行、人民得以安居乐业、全球荣景再现的不二法门。同时，世盟也将秉持世盟的宗旨，请世盟、亚盟各国峰会全力协助各国政府与人民共同打拼防疫，让大家在疫情肆虐下活得更有希望、更有意义。最后，再次感谢大家特别拨冗参加这次的会议，敬祝各位 健康快乐，万事如意。本次圆桌会议顺利圆满成功，谢谢。
Meanwhile, as time goes by, we see that COVID-19 pandemic has developed into such a critical situation that no one can mind his own business. For the sake of prevention of leadership vacuum, I would like to appeal that the great powers in America and Europe should stand out briefly to play a global leader and guide us to tackle the problem. Furthermore, they also should sincerely and unselfishly unite the United Nations, its NGO, and the WHO to work together to make best use of this facility to provide a final global plan for the pandemic prevention. In addition, they also should be generous enough to donate freely the vaccine to poor countries as much as possibly as quickly created global immunity surrounding to control the pandemic, and controlling the situation of pandemic effectively is the only way that we can restore the normal life to make a good living, recover the national economy, secure the normal performance of international trade, and restore the global prosperity. Meanwhile, the WLFD will observe as purposes to urge this country chapter to provide any help for his own government and the people to work together to fight with the pandemic. In such a way of global cooperation, life under the pandemic will become more hopeful and meaningful. Finally, thank you for you again for taking your time to attend the meeting, and may I wish you health, happiness, and the great success of the roundtable. Thank you so much. The following is Honorable Yao Zheng Yongchuan, APLFD Council Chairman, deliver a short speech. Mr. Zheng, please.
世盟老总会长，各位贵宾，大家好。
Mr. Honorable Yao Yingqi, President WFLD, distinguished guests, good day, everybody.
世盟是一个国际组织，1954年6月在南韩成立，1976年的3月从越南的西贡，也就是现在的胡志明市，迁移到我国的台北，从此由我国主导的亚盟67年来持续的推动自由、民主、人权，并且积极的参与亚太经贸的整合，并且把区域和平的理念推展到亚太地区。所以这一次亚盟2021亚太视讯论坛的主题就是新冠肺炎疫情对全球化的影响、经贸发展和自由民主。
APLFD is an international organization founded in June 1954 at the Republic of Korea. In March 1976, the Secretariat moved from Saigon to Taipei. Since then, the Republic of China has not only played a leading role in terms of promoting the idea of concept of freedom, democracy, and human rights continuously for 67 years, but actively participation, the joint effort for Asian regional economic and trade integration. The theme of 2021 Asia Pacific Virtual Roundtable is focused on the impact of COVID-19 on global and economic trade development and democracy.
2020年，新冠肺炎病毒在全球肆虐， 严重了影响人民的自由人权，对经济活动也受到冲击。亚太地区相对欧美国家，疫情在今年也突破亚太地区，也因为新冠疫情而大流行。亚太地区疫苗的短缺，接种缓慢，因此感染力呢比较强的病毒就失守了，所以亚太地区又在遭受严重的疫情。综合这1年多来，我们认为经济复苏的快慢取决于疫苗施打的覆盖率，因此加速疫苗覆盖率是当今世界各国积极要努力的目标。
The 2020 COVID-19 pandemic wreaked havoc on the whole world with serious influences on freedom, human rights, and economic activities. Despite the Asian Pacific region countries, relatively to European and American ones, rely on the measures of strict blockade and contact with confirmed persons to control the epidemic. However, in the second year of the pandemic and vaccination in Asian Pacific region is running a little slow. What the more destructive virus strain has breached the line of defense and made people suffering more. Based on the last year experience, economic resuscitation depends on the popularity and the rate of vaccination. How to expedite it is the common goal of various governments.
亚洲开发银行 ADB 在今年的8月发布了2021亚太地区关键的指标，显示新冠疫情对亚太地区的经济发展的冲击。近年来，亚太地区的经济发展非常强劲，亚太地区对全球的经济的贡献高达35%，但是当新冠疫情肆虐以来，人员流动受到的限制了，减少了亚太地区工作时间将近8%，对贫困家庭或者是正在经济劳动者都造成了严重的影响。
The Asian Development Bank (ADB) released 2021 key indicators for Asia and Pacific, displays the facts of the COVID-19 is threatening economic development of Asia Pacific. In recent years, the economic growth in Asia Pacific was strong in 2019 and accounted for as much as global GDP 35%. But since the pandemic, for authorities concerned, adopted measures of refinement and personal flow, cutting down working hours by 8%, thus brought serious problems for the poor family and gig laborers.
展望未来，疫情的时期，经贸发展和以往不同。解除防疫的措施之后，跨境人员的移除和观光旅游才可以逐渐的好转，但仍然需要疫情的时间所长一段长的时间，才能带动经济面的完全恢复。台湾人民在疫情期间所展现的自制力和适应力，直接降低了疫情的影响力。在面对新冠肺炎疫情期待复苏的这个时候，台湾乃要将继续的坚持普世价值、自由、民主和人权，同时在经济持续强化发展区域的贸易伙伴关系，拓展多边关系，让经济能够全面复苏早点到来。谢谢大家。
Look into the future and what economic and trade development will be different from the past. After lifting the epidemic prevention measures, cross-border movement of the people and the sightseeing industries will gradually recover at first and it needs more time to come to an overall recovery. During the epidemic, Taiwan people revealed their highly disciplined and adaptability nature to minimize the impact of epidemic. Right now, while we came face to face with influence of COVID-19, Taiwan will still insist on universal value of democracy, freedom, and human rights. At the same time, to develop regional trade opportunity and partnership, intensify multilateral cooperation, and make the economic fully recovery come earlier. Thank you. Thank you for your time. The following gentleman, Mr. Peter Lee, is going to deliver a speech. Mr. Lee is the Secretary General of APLFD. Mr. Lee, please.
Thank you, Secretary General David. As Secretary General of APLFD Secretariat, I'm pleased to announce that under the rampage of COVID-19 pandemic everywhere, Taiwan is now safe again to enable this Secretariat to hold the Asia-Pacific Virtual Roundtable at the regular time this year. So the roundtable today is the happiest result. It is aimed to accordingly to discuss the COVID-19 pandemic and its impact on globalization, especially on economic trade development and democratic freedoms. I appreciate very much that I have privilege and honor to say a few words in the roundtable. And I also sincerely welcome all of you to join the meeting. As you know, globalization has altered the way we live and earn a livelihood around the world for quite a long time. Consequently, travel and trade have been recognized as significant determinants of the spread of COVID-19 pandemic. Additionally, the rise in urbanization and the closer integration of world economy have facilitated global interconnectedness. Therefore, globalization has emerged as an essential mechanism of disease transmission. For this reason, Council Chairman Zeng considered to hold the roundtable to discuss the topic to try to examine the potential impact of COVID-19 on globalization and global health in terms of mobility, trade, travel, and countries most impacted. The effects of globalization can be operationalized in terms of mobility, economy, and healthcare systems. The mobility of individuals and its magnitude can be assessed using airline and seaport trade data and travel information. The economic impact can be measured based on the workforce, event cancellations, food and agriculture, academic institutions, and supply chain. The healthcare capacity can be assessed by considering healthcare systems indicators and prepared of countries. The pandemic has placed an unprecedented burden on the world economy. Healthcare and globalization through travel, events cancellation, unemployment workforce, food chain, academia, and healthcare capacity. Based on some academic investigation results, we were told that certain countries were more vulnerable than others. In Africa, more vulnerable countries include South Africa and Egypt. In Europe, they were Russia, Germany, and Italy. In Asia and Oceania, they were India, Iran, Pakistan, Saudi Arabia, and Turkey. And for the America, they were Brazil, USA, Chile, Mexico, and Peru. The impact on mobility economy and healthcare systems have only started to manifest. The findings may help us in the planning and implementation of strategic at the country level to help ease this emerging burden. We need to watch out very carefully for the government and always provide helping tips for the government to tackle the problems. At the same time, we also have seen inequities within and between countries that have exposed and manifest, while powerful forces are already at play to use the pandemic crisis to further consolidate the already unjust concerns of economic and political power in fewer hands. While the United States, China, Russia, and the EU play lip service in support of UN Secretary General's urgent call for the vaccine equity as a global public good, the supply of COVID-19 vaccines to the developing world is billions of doses short of what is needed. So far, we see vaccine nationalism, vaccine diplomacy, and vaccine profiteering trump vaccine equity. We need to urge them to be more humanitarian because freedom, democracy, and human rights are involved. Today, we assemble here to hold the round table, not only to share the experience of your own, but also try to find some solutions to the impact of COVID-19 pandemic on globalizations. So finally, I would also like to appeal to you again. As Chairman Zheng just said, please join efforts with Taiwan to help to develop regional trade partnership and identify multilateral cooperation for economic recovery in Asia. Once again, thank you so much for your participation and contributions. May I wish you good luck, health, and good success of the meeting. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Peter Lee. The following is the keynote speaker, Honorable Tina Rose Muna Barnes, Deputy Speaker, Guan of Guam. Mr. Barnes, please.
Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes, very clear.
Thank you. Buenas Zenhafa Day. Greetings and thank you to the Asian Pacific League for Freedom and Democracy for the invitation to be here today. I am Tina Rose Munya Barnes, the Vice Speaker of the 36th Guam Legislature. I am humbled and honored to gather virtually with you all to discuss the impact of COVID-19 on globalization and economic development in our region. As many of us are all too aware, the pandemic has affected nearly every aspect of our daily lives. We have seen supplies and food shipments delayed. We have witnessed our hospitals overwhelmed with the rising number of COVID-19 patients and not enough beds or staff to support it. This pandemic is far from over, and our resolve continues to be tested as we overcome this latest hurdle. While each of us face these challenges, we must remember that COVID-19 is not isolated to any one jurisdiction. No, it affects each and every one of us. What happens in one part of the world will inevitably affect another. This is why we must address the effects of this pandemic from a global perspective, especially as we plan for a post-COVID world. It is abundantly clear that we must change how we approach trade and global development. You know, since the 16th century, our little island of Guam has served as a port of call from Spanish ships to American vessels. Guam has been at the forefront of trade and development in the region. Today, our ports play a crucial role in the lives of not just everyone who calls Guam home, but to military bases and neighboring islands in the region alike. Our port is the primary seaport in Micronesia and serves as a transshipment hub for the entire Western Pacific region. Guam is an important transportation hub that links the Western Pacific Islands with the expanding Far East market, the United States, and the rest of the world. In fact, an estimated 90% of the goods and supplies consumed by its constituencies pass through Guam's commercial port. Knowing the importance of transshipment, not only for Guam, but for the entire Blue Continent, I wrote legislation that is now public law to streamline transshipment for Guam, Micronesia, and our neighboring Asian countries. This piece of legislation created a task force for transshipment that will provide a significant improvement for the people of Guam and its economy. Guam's geographical and political strategic location within the Asian Pacific region plays a vital component in serving as a manufacturing hub in the Asian market. Creating a technology hub in the Guam and the Marianas archipelago will render lucrative employment for our people and connect our region to the rest of the world. With tourism at a standstill, Guam is presented with an opportunity to rebuild an even stronger economy, capitalizing on new industries that have yet to be tapped. One such opportunity is to return to our roots and utilize Guam as a transshipment hub. According to a recent report by the International Finance Corporation, logistics can contribute greatly to the country's productivity and economic development. Investment and increased efficiency in the logistics and transshipment sector can boost competitiveness and stimulate economic growth in emerging markets. Notably, the COVID-19 pandemic has negatively impacted Guam's shipping and port sector. The United Nations Economic and Social Commission for Asia and the Pacific report published that any significant disruption to the maritime transportation system can have devastating implications for the global supply chain, as well as America's national security. Thus, maritime elements of the global supply chain are considered by Homeland Security to be critical assets and systems that must be protected. But we know that in order to rebuild stronger economies and more resilient communities, we must contain this deadly virus. So as we look at overcoming this COVID-19 pandemic, I think it is clear to all of us that our economy is directly linked to our healthcare capacity. We cannot have a healthy economy if our people don't have accessible, available, and affordable healthcare. It is no secret that Guam is in desperate need of healthcare workers. During this pandemic, we were fortunate that our COVID heroes chose to keep fighting on the front lines to keep our families safe. But we need to do more to help our healthcare heroes and provide better healthcare for our people. So currently, Guam is listed as a health professional shortage area under the United States Health Resources and Services Administration. Guam has many young students who seek to pursue a healthcare education. However, due to the competitive wages nationally and globally and the excessive cost of a medical education, local students seek opportunities elsewhere. So with COVID-19 on the rise, affordable medical education within the Blue Continent has now become even more of a need than ever before. So I recently introduced legislation that partnered with other Micronesia others in Micronesia to secure funding for a student education program for healthcare professionals. Students would be able to pursue careers in 10 different healthcare fields while receiving substantial financial support for tuition costs over the duration of a health degree. By addressing the high cost of education, it will incentivize students who benefit from the program to return home to serve their communities. My colleagues, as I stated earlier, this pandemic is not over, but I remain hopeful in our fight to build back a better economy because of our partnerships. Guam is truly grateful for all the assistance our brothers and sisters in the Blue Continent and Asian region have done for us. And I make it my duty to continue to look for ways in which Guam can assist this region even beyond the pandemic. If we rely on each other's assistance and resources, we will create a better, more sustainable economy in our region. So once again, I thank the Asian Pacific League for Freedom and Democracy for allowing me the opportunity to speak on some of the emerging projects we have here on Guam, and on Guam hope to achieve and share with all of you. So Sijuas Masi, and thank you.
Thank you, Honorable Tina Rose Muna Barnes, Vice Speaker of Guam Legislature. Yes, COVID-19 is not isolated to any one jurisdiction. It affected each and every one of us. This is why we must discuss the effects of this pandemic from global perspective as we plan for a post-COVID world. Thanks again. The following keynote speaker is Miss Kimberly. Is Kimberly? Oh, I'm sorry. It's O'Connell. Mr. New Zealand's Parliament member. Please, Mr. O'Connell, please.
Thank you very much, Mr. Secretary General, and hello to all of you and greetings from New Zealand. My name is Simon, Member of Parliament in the City of Auckland for a centre-right party called National. I'm the immediate past chair of New Zealand's Foreign Affairs, Defence and Trade Committee, and also one of the co-chairs of what's known as IPAC, the Interparliamentary Alliance on China. And so along with a number of other MPs and senators across the world, we speak up on issues, particularly in relationship to China. Also very pleased to be part of the very new Formosa Club for the Indo-Pacific and to deal with my Taiwanese colleagues here in New Zealand. So thank you all, to the presidents, vice presidents, chairmen and secretary generals, to other members of parliament, senators, academics and others, thank you. And if I might, a particular note to John Wood, who kindly invited me here. John, I look forward to meeting in person when we're out of this lockdown. So I'm not going to focus too much on COVID in itself. I will try to keep my remarks around the notions of trade and our democratic freedoms. I take it as given of the nature of COVID, the disruption, the serious disruption that it's applied to individuals, right through, of course, to our economies, to our nations. And I would say, unfortunately, to some of the heart of our democratic and liberal values. I describe the impact of COVID on globalization as something that is paradoxical. On one hand, it's brought us closer together, but in many other ways, it's pushed us apart. So when I reflect on it bringing us closer together, obviously there's been loads of cooperation between countries, and many of the countries that are represented here today, and right across the globe. When I even think of something as simple, if I might phrase it that way, as simple as the vaccine development, there are over 250 partnerships involved to develop these vaccines, and they go right across, as I say, the globe. The interactions are quite remarkable and perhaps a good sign of where globalization works. As I speak to you today, New Zealand is sourcing more COVID vaccines from Spain. I believe the Australians have been doing a swap with Poland. For me, these are just small illustrations of those global cooperations which exist. But on the other hand, we are also seeing aspects of globalization fail, or at the very least, falter. Of course, and somewhat understandably, we're seeing many countries closing their doors, almost literally. And New Zealand perhaps is somewhat an example of that, that we have closed ourselves off to some aspects of the world. We still trade, we still bring in supplies, but it's very difficult to come and visit our country now. And while not impossible for someone like myself to travel, it entails major issues coming back. And that's the antithesis of a global environment, which is not just about trade, about freedom and about movement. We'll all know, and listening to earlier speakers, the disruption to our trade channel. New Zealand's ports are struggling. It is more difficult to get supplies in. There are not enough containers. The shipping routes have changed. Expenses are going up. These will be common experiences around the world. And as has been discussed very briefly earlier, we're seeing the rise of vaccine nationalism, which at one level I will admit is understandable. It is the right and proper role of the state, the nation state, to protect its own citizens. But at the same time, we live in a global world where our common humanity needs to be understood. And so I do see the rise of this nationalistic, if you will, vaccine approach as unfortunate. And there's a hint of that when we see the fights, if you will, around and in the EU around vaccine access. But if I look even wider then at just the question of globalization and how COVID's impacting it, countries, I think, and certainly New Zealand, are beginning to rightly question their supply chains and who they are reliant on. So in New Zealand, it became very obvious very early on during the pandemic, 18 months ago and up to today, that for supplies like personal protective equipment or PPE, the vaccine, of course, we were totally reliant on other countries to provide these supplies. New Zealand has no ability to provide them for themselves, and not at the quantities which are needed. As I also would want to highlight, and as is known to a number of people, New Zealand in particular has a large reliance on China for its trade. About 30% of New Zealand's trade is with China. Importantly, and I say to people often, of course, that means that 70% is with other countries, and we celebrate that. But New Zealand has become highly dependent on China, and this is raising a number of issues here currently. Positively, New Zealand is trying to diversify and move its trading relationships. We are and very pleased to have signed FTAs already with a number of countries, including the likes of Taiwan and China. But we are keen to develop further trade with the likes of the UK, the EU, and many others. New Zealand relies on trade, and we would like to think of ourselves as champions for free trade. So as a quick advertorial, if you want to do a trade deal, let us know. And of course, more recently, we had the RCEP, or the Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership, which engages a number of countries, including those represented here today. But what COVID is doing, of course, is raising wider questions of our strategic dependence. And there are big debates here in New Zealand of the fact that we cannot supply some of the goods that we need first and foremost to engage COVID. I mentioned the likes of the PPE, but we're also having debates around symbolically the closure of our one and only refinery. If New Zealand was to do this, we would become 100% reliant on others for our supplies. And there are those of us, myself included, who believe that countries need to learn from COVID the importance not only of having their own supply chains, but not becoming dependent on countries whose often values may be very different to our own. I do need to note, and I have mentioned China several times, I need to make very quickly the distinction that when I use the term China, I'm particularly referring to the CCP and the governance structures. But I think COVID challenges us on trade. But for people like myself, part of these challenges also highlight our strong dependence, which entail then reduces at times our ability to speak on other issues. And so we shouldn't, as we would say in English, beat around the bush, that there are issues with the CCP around human rights, the destruction of democracy in Hong Kong, the continued coercive diplomacy and the interference in our local and central government activities. And this is a conundrum for New Zealand, even in a COVID environment, perhaps even more acute, of how does one freely trade, but importantly for me, freely speak. And I think a sad example of this is around the exclusion of Taiwan from the recent World Health Organization discussions. I think it is symbolic of the challenges we face, that what should be a global institution, in a sense non-political, that being the World Health Organization, chose a political route and excluded a country that was doing remarkably well. And I sit on a side of the fence that says all countries should be involved to share what's best. The last few points I would make, Mr. Chair, if I could, is that ultimately COVID, while important in itself, is distracting from other events and activities within that wider democratic space that we talk of. It's such a dominant topic. It's been easy to miss or only lightly reflect upon other issues. The coup in Myanmar, the tragedy unfolding and continuing to unfold in Afghanistan. And I've touched in some ways on what's been happening in China. And I think in recent hours, CCP controlled police in Hong Kong, shutting down the Tiananmen Square Museum. A small thing, but very symbolic. And as I say, COVID at times distracts us from drawing higher attention to these things. These are things that we need to keep speaking about. In fact, if I might continue on that theme, we are seeing a major change by the CCP at the moment, which affects many of our countries, which is the undermining of the tech sector and the real challenges around some of the cultural expressions. And this will have an impact, as it already is, on New Zealand. We're also seeing, unfortunately, with COVID going on, the rise of further malicious actors, be they state or non-state. New Zealand at the moment is suffering an array of cyber attacks. This is not particular to New Zealand, but we know several countries and non-state actors are using COVID as an opportunity to cause trouble and ultimately to try and undermine our democratic principles. And then much closer to home, and a conversation which I think all our countries need to have, and certainly here in New Zealand, is the importance of our values, of our democracy, our human rights and freedoms, because these are under pressure. And without going down that enormous rabbit hole, I sit on a side in a political philosophy that says in times of crisis, those freedoms, those values, those democratic principles become more important, not less. So finally, you've also got elements that the COVID environment around democracy or our freedoms, as I say, distracts from events happening in other particular countries, but it also distracts us. Understandably, I want to stress, it's understandable we do talk about COVID. It's major. But what I'm also saying is that there are other discussions that need to be had. Climate change is a perfect example of that. So a challenge for all of us is how do we maintain our trading relationships? How do we ensure the benefits not only for ourselves, but for each other? But in that wider democratic space, how do we hold on to our values? How do we continue to speak up to them internationally and domestically? And so I welcome again the chance to be here, to share a few thoughts, and look forward to hearing the other contributions. And again, my thanks to you, Mr. Wood, for the chance to have been invited. Thank you all.
Thank you very much for you accept our invitation to participate in this roundtable. Your viewpoints and your remarks and your analysis is so informative. Thanks again. The next gentleman we would like to invite Australian Chapter Chairman, Mr. Adam Campton. Mr. Campton, please.
In particular, can I thank the President, Vice President, Secretary General for this invitation, and to congratulate them also on organising another Zoom roundtable. As we all know how difficult these things are in the context of how conferences and roundtables are to be organised. Could I also extend my apologies in relation to my colleague, Senator Kimberly Kitchen, who has been tied up in an important finance committee meeting in Canberra. She is a distinguished member of the federal opposition, and needless to say, as Simon would be aware, parliamentarians' time is precious, and unlike New Zealand, where we have border considerations of the states and the Commonwealth, we have all sorts of complications in travel, which, as some of you may be aware, was an issue facing our Prime Minister only last weekend in his relatively small travel between Canberra and Sydney, which is a flight of, lucky if it was 1.5 hours. However, let me progress. So I'm Adam Kempton, the chair of the Australian chapter, and I'm a former member of parliament in a regional seat in Victoria, and also chairman of the Manningham Council, where a large number of the Taiwanese community reside in Melbourne. And I might add, a very welcome part of that general community. Seems to me that the overriding and important considerations in this roundtable are the COVID crisis, which has largely been touched on, but I want to also touch on, and the world economy, largely focusing on, and Simon rightly pointed out, the issue of the distinction between CCP and Taiwan. So if I could refer to it, whenever I refer to China, I'm referring to CCP China, because that's where our issues lie, not with Taiwan. And in fact, Australia is very supportive of Taiwan, notwithstanding the recognition issues which have been incredibly problematic. But can I background all of this by saying that, unlike probably many members of WLFD, Australia, except, should I say, for the states of Malaysia, Australia consists of a number of states and is a federation. And effectively, the states come out of a background of being separate countries. And although we come together under a federal constitution, each state has its own constitution, and there is, to a large extent, a lack of clarity between where the powers rest. For instance, the administration of hospitals and health rests with the states. The overall coordination of health issues, such as the pandemic, rests with the Commonwealth government, our federal government. As a consequence of that, at the start of the pandemic, a national cabinet was formed consisting of the Prime Minister and the state premiers. But that has been a tense relationship because the states are expected to implement the restrictions in relation to the pandemic, whilst the Commonwealth has responsibilities in relation to bringing in vaccines and the like. So the dysfunction between the two can be a serious problem. And in fact, that has been highlighted by the fact that depending on which state you're in, affects what restrictions you face. So currently in Western Australia, our most westerly state, there are no restrictions on movement within the state, but there are restrictions on getting out of the state or going into that state. In contrast, in New South Wales and in Victoria, and I'm speaking generally here because that highlights the distinction state to state to state. So every Australian state operates differently. So currently in Victoria, there are restrictions of movement of 5 kilometres from your address. In New South Wales, I think it is 10 kilometres. And in other states where there are fewer breakouts of COVID, the restrictions are different. That means a uniform approach to resolving these issues are difficult because of the lack of consistency. The most recent development in relation to it is that the Commonwealth and the states have agreed to a pathway forward which relates to thresholds of vaccinations. There are still confusions about whether that in those percentages are included double vaccinations or, more importantly, vaccinations of children under the age of 18. Are they considered in the percentages of vaccinations? Those are practical matters which are yet to be ironed out. And given we are now in August and getting close to the end of the year, it's hard to think optimistically to think we'll be able to travel freely within Australia by the end of the year. So that's somewhat different to those countries who are members who have unicameral, as in single governments. New Zealand being, of course, advantaged by that. The other issue that I want to deal with is which relates to the issue of trade and globalisation. Like as has been put, the cost of shipping is soaring. It's erratic. It's adding enormously to the cost of import and export, and Australia is an export country. The cost, as an example, of steel in Australia has gone up, which is imported, is gone up by 50%. So that's a massive add-on. And there are many examples where those costs have increased. And that is also taken in hand with, we actually have, one would not like to say a booming economy, but in the regional parts of Australia, we do have a booming economy. We have an economy where we're on the lowest unemployment rate in about 2 decades. We have house price rises in the capitals, even in the worst hit economies of Melbourne and Sydney, of rising between 10 and 20% per annum. In the country regional areas, the same. We have the lowest interest rates on record. So our economy is in fact going well, and we have just come off a GDP growth of 3%, now down to around 1%, anticipated to perhaps go to a 0%, but where there's no talk in Australia of recession, no talk. And having said that, the most affected economies are Melbourne and Sydney, which you might say is an extraordinary comment to make, given my comment about the growth rate in Australia, the shortage of labour, etc. Can I touch on the serious issue of China? Relations with the CCP and Australia have never been worse. The Australian Trade Minister is unable to talk to the Chinese equivalent minister. The Chinese have applied penalty tariffs on a number of products, barley and iron ore and coal. On barley, it is 80%. So it's not even a question of penalising us to the next competitor. It's a question of basically saying we will not be taking Australian barley. It's effectively a ban. Having said that, the nature of Chinese international diplomacy is it's inconsistent, and that inconsistency means that in relation to sales of wheat, our sales are up, and our overall sales to China are also up. So we live in a world of incredible irony. Given that we're an export country, we had the privilege of massive increases in the price of iron ore, which also goes to China, but that now price is coming back. But we have lost, the Chinese students were a major part of our economy, as were Chinese tourists, and of course all of that has stopped. But that is actually a combination of the Chinese attitude to Australia and Corona. But that would have happened irrespective of the disease. In relation to the curtailment of freedoms, without going through them in detail, they have been curtailed inconsistently between states, but at a fairly high level, and at a level on a longer term the Australian community will not tolerate. The question becomes, in terms of freedoms, to what extent will we return to the norm, or will there be an erosion of those freedoms? As a good example, Australia is currently going through the debate of COVID vaccine passports, and will we need to use those as between states? It is also going through the debate of compulsory vaccinations, particularly for emergency services workers, and a raft of those.
We have a limitation of the time. So we hope some other times we can have a chance to have a face-to-face talk. Your analysis is very widespread, very good. I appreciate your viewpoint. But during the agenda, we have to go to the next person. By the way, before I forgot, the sequence of the discussant are arranged by countries alphabetical order. The next gentleman I would invite is Mr. Tampan from Cambodia chapter. Mr. Tampan, please. Mr. Tampan, please. Please turn on your microphone. Your speaker, turn it on. You didn't turn on your microphone, so we cannot hear you.
Can you hear me? Yes, yes. Yes, okay. Okay. Yeah, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Dear honorable guests, ladies and gentlemen. In the name of Cambodia and Social Enterprise Association, Entrepreneur in the Association, I would like to update you about the impact of COVID-19 on globalization, economic, trade development, and democratic freedom. Let me introduce you our Special Enterprise Association in a short name, SEAC. Especially, we register it with Ministry of Interior of Kingdom of Cambodia on 17 January in 2019. The Social Entrepreneur Association was established to contribute to the development of the national economy with the royal government of Cambodia under the wise leadership of Samdech Akya Mahasenapati Techo Hun Sen, the Prime Minister of the Kingdom of Cambodia. In the response to the impact of post-COVID-19 on globalization, economic, trade, development, and democratic freedom, I would like to share you to the country report of Cambodia. First, I would like to show you the recent information about the globalization with Cambodia. As you can see, our royal government of Cambodia opened our heart to accept all from the support from our friend, counterpart internationally. With the example of the Sinovac and Sinopharm from China, AstraZeneca from UK and Japan, Johnson & Johnson from USA, and Promise vaccine from Australia. With this evidence base, we are work in the statistic and stable partnership for the globally and harness of the globalization. Approximately around 11 million people at the last received first dose equal to 64.10%, and fully two doses, approximately 8.4 million people among total 16 million the population. Our children from 12 to 13 years old was 77.22% vaccine in the first dose among 2 million stack. On the other hand, even though we are one among small countries in ASEAN, but we frankly provide the vaccine to all the foreigners who are currently doing business in Cambodia. Second, I would like to share you the economic growth and trade development during the period of COVID-19. In year 2021, ADB has predicted that Cambodia economy is forecast to grow 4.4% in this year and 5.5% in 2022. As the economic recovery in the major trade partner both demand for the Cambodia export, according to the Asian Development Bank ADB report released on 28 April 2021. Third, let me share you about the democratic freedom. Our Cambodia government, the secular started in working with own approach from human rights, opinion and freedom of speech. Is our Prime Minister Samdech Akia Mahasina Cho Hun Sen announced in this the public speech. The Prime Minister Hun Sen consider ASEAN, regional, international, and specifically of China as connector for the Cambodia foreign policy and control pathway of to the further of the kingdom, regional and international, to economic and statistic benefit for the development of the country. On the other hand, as you have seen, the number of the newly established political party registered for the country and international relationship that we approve to run political party by Ministry of Interior. Hence, We are doing our best to have a regular election with a free and fair environment under Democracy Act. Freedom and respect to human rights as we advocate for the civil war. Now Cambodia conceptualize ourselves with the idea of and we head of the mind to the spirit of peace and moral understanding. Thank you to the peace. The regional government of Cambodia and the family and to the principle of liberal, plural democracy, strive for the peace, security, political stability, social order, and smartly manage the macroeconomic and finance through launching and implementing at the comprehensive strategy such as the regular of strategy as a common policy agenda for the social economic development and national statistic development plan and other key social statistics. Thank you for APLFD, and we hope to see you next time soon, and we are happy to join with APLFD as a good full information for Cambodia, and we more learn from the good member of APLFD. And on behalf of Cambodia, we wish you all the membership in APLFD. We have a good.
Thank you very much for what you have mentioned in your country. And regarding the COVID-19, the economic, democratic, freedom development. Thank you. The next gentleman is from Fiji, the Fiji chapter chairman, Mr. Nagin. Nagin, please. Nagin, I'm sorry. Please, you're on.
Can you hear me? Okay. All right, I'll do that. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. It gives me great pleasure to once again present the Fiji chapter report for this 2021 Asia Pacific Roundtable. It has been about 2 years since we met in Taipei, which was, I think, August 2019. Since that time, and that was my last overseas trip, by the way. Since that time, virtual conferencing has become the new norm. Unfortunately, COVID-19 virus still has a grip on the world, and this pandemic has had a major negative effect on all aspects of globalization, especially in the areas of our economic, trade development, and democratic freedoms. Again, despite the current international travel restrictions, I am very grateful to the Secretariat for organizing this second virtual conference. The fight for freedom and democracy must go on, especially in times of such as this pandemic. While Fiji was able to contain the virus and become COVID-free in year 2020, we are currently suffering the onslaught of a second wave of COVID-19 infections, which began in April this year. Since that time, we have had about 45,000 cases of community infection and more than 500 deaths due to COVID-19. We were at one time the highest rate of infection when you look at the highest rate in the world when you look at the pro rata population of Fiji. And we were higher than places like India and other countries where there's a lot of infection. Now, our health services, because of this, has almost been crippled. I will now touch a bit on the economic trade development. Last year in our virtual conference, I mentioned that one of Fiji's largest economic and GDP contributors was the tourism industry. And that has come to a complete halt due to closure of Fiji's international borders. While the closure of borders helped Fiji contain the COVID virus, the effect it has had on Fiji's economy has been drastic. A large number of Fiji's population remain unemployed, while those that are employed have had their work hours and wages significantly cut. As a result of the second wave of COVID, the Fiji government has to take extreme measures against its citizens' freedoms in a bid to contain the virus. These measures, like those I mentioned last year, have included snap lockdowns to daily curfews from 4 a.m. to 6 p.m., further restrictions on social gatherings, and the locking down of designated containment zones that prohibit movement across borders. The Fiji government has also implemented several stringent COVID safety protocols that businesses must adhere to in order to operate. While these restrictions and protocols may have been necessary, it has had a negative effect on the parts of Fiji's economy, especially in the areas of foreign investment and trade developments. Now, delegates, I will touch a bit on democratic freedoms. As I mentioned in my last year's address, any restrictions that are introduced that limit a citizen's democratic rights must be reasonable and applied effectively to mitigate the continued spread of COVID-19. The continuing restrictions on freedoms and movements and gatherings that are still in place are reasonable, especially in light of the fact there is still transmission of the virus within Fiji. However, what has been questionable in Fiji government's recent policy is called no jab, no job. Essentially, the government, in order to achieve herd immunity through vaccination, has made it compulsory that all employers and employees be vaccinated with the first dose of the vaccine by 1st August and second dose of the vaccine by 1st November 2021. If an employee does not receive the vaccination, the employer's business will face closure and the employee will not be allowed to enter the workplace. On the face of it, this policy contradicts many of the constitutional rights guaranteed under Fiji's constitution, such as right not to be forced to undergo medical treatment, right not to be discriminated on the basis of health status, and right to economic participation and livelihood. There has been one constitutional case that has been filed in the High Court challenging the constitutionality of the government's no jab, no job policy. Perhaps a decision will be given in this soon, and I will be able to relay that to you once it comes. There are several other issues in Fiji relating to violations of freedom and democracy. An example was recent wrongful arrest and detention of several opposition politicians for speaking out publicly against the rushing or passing of an act of parliament believed to adversely affect indigenous land rights. None of these politicians have actually been charged, but were actually harassed by being taken to the police station for questioning during curfew hours. So they did not even have access to lawyers, etc. Just a few days ago, a well-known doctor was arrested and detained by the police for 48 hours for advocating against COVID vaccination. People in Fiji are fearful as their freedom of speech has been wrongly curtailed by the government, and this needs to be addressed strongly by the international community. But there is not all bad news. There is some good news. And one of the good news is that we now have 97% of the population already vaccinated by the first dose of the vaccine. And 55% of the population has already got the second dose of the vaccine. Now, for that, we are thankful to Australia, New Zealand, India, and US because they have been donating these vaccines to Fiji. And I'm very grateful, and I like to put that on record. Now, the other good news is that this year in Japan, in the Olympics, Fiji won a gold medal for rugby sevens on 28 July, beating New Zealand in the finals, a score of 27-12. Now, John, be careful. Next time we'll beat you again. I take this opportunity to thank the Secretariat for working hard to host this wonderful conference. And I also thank all the participants because at this time, your contribution on COVID-19 is of utmost importance. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for your briefing on the current situation and COVID-19 impacts on economic, trade, and human rights of Fiji. The next gentleman is Joseph Xu. I have to apologize to all the discussants owing to the time limitation. I'm afraid you have cut your address within no more than 8 or 10 minutes. Please cut it short. Now, Mr. Xu. Mr. Xu,
yes,
are you there?
Yes, I'm here.
Okay, please.
Can you hear me?
Okay, please go on.
Okay, and actually I have a 5-page report, but I make short. I make a half page, then cut another half, so only 1 page now. Okay, let me start my report. Okay, Guam economy is dependent on so many the outside factor. That is post-pandemic, and of course it's difficult and to project. So actually, tourists and the military is the two leg stool of our economies, which is one of the reasons Guam's economy is so potentially volatile. Growing trade posted by the China will increase the US military presence on Guam with more spending and the tax collections. That could be very good for Guam, but it is also tended to put tourists off a little bit. The federal government has provided or committed to provide near the 2.5 billion to helping on island get through the COVID-19 pandemic. Guam is really help relocate. Guam is really help to relocate the Afghan government ruler Lia Guerrero of Guam. On June 12, she sent a letter to Biden. Guam has stood ready to serve as a safe and a secure route for the type of the humanitarian effort throughout history. Unfortunately, we didn't get any response from the Pentagon, so far we don't see any the Afghans on Guam, on island. On January 12, 2021, we prepared a humanitarian charter flight, carry dozens of people who had either been studied on Guam and Saipan and the border closure, or where is needed to the medical treatment. They're going to Taiwan. The flight operated by China Airlines landed in Taiwan International Airport, carried with 47 passengers and 13 crew aboard. 5 of the passengers had applied to local hospital for treatment of tumors and other conditions. Okay, as part of the United States, Guam is one of the favorite sites of the global Vision dividend, with about 80% of the island's eligible population fully inaugurated, and with a surplus of the doors. The government recently launched a Vision tourist program we called LVNV. Through this program, this means you can travel from countries with less vaccine available, can get here, can get their shot on Guam, whilst quarantined at one of the island's resort hotel. According to the Guam the visitor bureau, more than 2,000 travelers have been vaccinated since early June, and there are no sign of the program is approach the capacity. On the military build-up on Guam is being met the stalwart resistance, especially from the indigenous Chamorro group, who are protesting the having their construction of a Marine Corps base. I almost finished my report. This is the last sentence of for the Guam people here. The military build-up on Guam is being made with the stalwart the resistance, especially from the indigenous Chamorro group. They are protesting the habitat construction of the Marine Corps base and a live fire training range complex, and the aircraft carry the briefing station, and the other new facility are working on their island. They have documented how to build, treat the water, the plants, the cultural site, the recreation area, and the ecosystem. And they are organized protesting and should mitigate the worst effect of the large U.S. military presence. Recognizing blinking that, so a colony with only about 170,000 residents here, they have a little recourse of hope in the outbreak. Okay, and thank you for you guys listening to my report, and I wish everybody keep health, and hope can see you guys soon. Thank you very much.
Ramia Sapova.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, wonderful. Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman, Council Chairman, Secretary General, members of APLFD, and ladies and gentlemen. I congratulate APLFD to continue with the tradition of hosting this virtual conference during the pandemic, and thank you for inviting me. I also want to offer my condolences to the Philippines chapter for the loss of General Rui. He was a strong freedom fighter and a wonderful person. I've known him for many, many years. He will always be remembered. On behalf of the India chapter, I'm honored to present this report highlighting the post-COVID-19 impacts on India's economic, trade development, and democratic freedom. The 2020 and 2021 lockdown and closing of the interstate, district, and international borders caused severe disruption in the supply of essential goods, leading to inflation. Indian economy supports close to over 100 million migrant workers that come from villages across India to work in the cities such as Delhi and Mumbai. The lockdown dispersed at least half of these individuals back to their native villages. It is estimated, unfortunately, that at least 10 million Indians have lost stable, well-paying, salaried jobs. The economic impacts of the lockdown were disastrous for about 100 million migrant workers in India who make up for at least 20% of the workforce. These daily wages earners lost their income when businesses shut down. The economic fallout in the service sector, accounting for about 60% of India's GDP, and in the industrial sector because of the closure of industries and factories, have been phenomenal. India's exports and imports have also declined since the lockdown, but it is expected to increase. As per the IMF World Economic Outlook, which is dated April of this year, India's GDP growth rate in 2021 is projected at about 12.5%. However, Indian government estimates released this past month in August showed that India's GDP contracted by, unfortunately, 7.3% in 2020-21. These estimates include the direct losses in specific sectors because of the downtimes and the indirect impacts on industries because of their interdependence on other sectors of the economy. The Indian coastal cities such as Mumbai, Goa, Kerala make significant contributions to the local economies by supplying jobs to workers to catch and produce products that support the seafood industries in India and Southeast Asia. Pandemic has caused thousands of workers to permanently not return back to their jobs because many independent business owners have gone out of business. Not sure if they're going to come back. However, Prime Minister Modi's government has moved to kickstart the economy's recovery by selling stakes worth close to 81 billion in state-owned assets like airports, railway stations, and stadiums. But economists essentially see the policy as a move to generate cash in short term. It remains now as a desperate move without any guarantees that it will lead to more investments or not. According to Mr. Arvind Subramaniam, he's the former chief economic advisor to Prime Minister Modi, has stated that India has lost about a decade of lost opportunities and setbacks. India is in desperate need of reforms and fundamental changes in the economic policies. Recently, India's finance minister, Nirmala, stated that India is committed to forging a long-term relationship with US investors and proposes to meet with them twice a year. So hopefully something good will come next year. Meanwhile, violation of human rights during the pandemic is also a concern. In April this year, India's new COVID infections broke a global record with over 320,000 cases recorded on April 21st, 2021, plus about 2,800 deaths, bringing the total to more than 17 million cases since the pandemic began in 2020. India, of course, is a highly overpopulated country, so hence the numbers, unfortunately, have been rather high. The death toll is believed to be undercounted, and cremations and burial grounds are completely overrun. Several hospitals have called for emergency supplies as oxygen fell short. Overall, India's health system, I feel, in my opinion, collapsed. There are shortages of hospital beds, shortages of medical oxygen, antiviral drugs, and vaccines. People died in their homes and in hospital parking lots, unable to get care, unable to call an ambulance. I personally lost two of my friends I grew up with in the hospital parking lot. They were not able to get inside the hospital because just the doors were closed. Many were unable to cremate their family members that died, and were forced to dispose of bodies of their loved ones in the holy Ganges River. Hundreds of bodies were floating in the Ganges River in May and June. I feel the basic right to life, the right to get good health and dignity has been violated during COVID. Children's right to education has also affected due to shutdown of schools. Parents are afraid to send their children to school, while many are unable to educate and teach their children in their own homes because they themselves are probably not educated enough. As we are aware, social distance policy has caused violation of one's right to assembly. Recently, shockingly, in Uttar Pradesh state, the state authorities filed criminal charges against a man who appealed on Twitter to find oxygen for his dying grandfather. The authorities also sent complaints to the journalists who were reporting that certain officials had diverted some oxygen supplies elsewhere. This has violated the right to free speech and expression. However, the Supreme Court stepped in and said it will treat as contempt if the police act against any citizen asking for help on social media. Ladies and gentlemen, I end my report by thanking APLFT for supporting India chapter. I would also like to inform you that my nonprofit, Asia Pacific Foundation, is continuing to distribute free food to the poor and homeless in Delhi with the help of my colleagues in India. I hope that APLFD and chapter members will support the India chapter again and fight for equality and human rights. I sincerely wish everybody a safe and healthy 2021 and a new 2022. Thank you. Namaste.
Thank you. Thank you very much, President Sabharwal, for your report highlighting the COVID-19, post-COVID-19 impacts on India economic, trade, development, and democratic freedom. Thanks again. The next gentleman we have on the floor is Mr. Hisashi Hanibuchi.
At this time when the world is still being tormented by Corona-19, I would like to express my gratitude to being invited to this video conference. I'm gratefully looking forward to share with each one of you the previous precious viewpoint. I think some of you might know the Dr. Professor called Yuval Noah Harari, Hebrew University in Jerusalem. He predicted several years ago, just before the pandemic happened, he said that in this century of the 21st century living now, throughout the mankind had never happened something very unprecedented phenomenal will happen. And in fact, as a matter of the fact, we are now facing with the this kind of things. It's suffering us, and prophet in the Old Testament also predicted this flood and wars and the earthquake and so on. So this time of the year through the mankind is really special and something which made us think what is life, what is the happiness, and what is the mechanical democracy and the capitalism and the freedom. So as for the Japan, now we have still quite a lot of infected patients, food of the bed in the hospital is really in the crisis. And this pandemic taught us many things, gave us a lesson, such as Japanese system of democracy is well functioned or not. Even government wants to decide something and make action, but as you know, the process of democracy to get the agreement in the diet, it takes a lot of time. However, the Taiwan, same as the democratic countries, was very successful, and they did switch to measures and control the pandemic to the minimum. Of course, it might be because of a great leader of Tsai Yang, and also genius digital minister of Audrey Tang. This we have to learn. Japan does said to be very backward of digitalization and difficult to trace the people from next person or next place and so on. But due to the forcing staying at the home instead of company and keep working telework and online, is that promoted us to make a declaration first, and this is one of the major growth economic strategies, setting digitalization. And the many big companies such as Toyota, Panasonic, and so on keep employee at the home. Nearly the 50% of the workers are working in the house, and they will continue to work even if pandemic is stopped. And another things we learned from this occasion, we have to strengthen the supply chain instead of centralizing in one place, so one country. Most of the medical products are actually imported from the China, including the mask and other garments and so on. So in order to decrease reduction of the risk, the government decided to diversify so that we can reduce the risk centered on the one particular country. So now they are looking for the other Southeast Asia's supply chains divided. And pandemic taught us various lessons. As I said, Thomas Piketty remained in the capital ideology. This policy of the wealth getting so much, especially after the corona, like a globalist governor and base of Chinese world big company had the greatest profit through these opportunities. This is inexcusable, the getting a profit capitalism out of a disaster. Knowing the Africa, the people do not have a facility or medical equipment, and needless to say, the vaccination rate is very poor. But they enjoy the huge amount of money and not even paying tax. If they could share the profit for a country like Africa, you know, how many people's life could be saved. So this is not the freedom and the democracy and the healthy capitalism taking over in the monopolizing all the profits. And this not only in America, but Japanese little bit this policy of the wealth is getting more and more, although it's not to the extent of America. So I hope basic fundamental issues, what is happiness, what is equality, happiness, and capitalism should be a the world needs to cooperate and coexist, prosper. We learned from this unprecedented pandemic. So I hope next time we can see in Rio and talk together and share the opinion. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Next time we should everything back to normal again. We appreciate your presentation. Thank you very much. The next gentleman is Abdullah from Malaysia. Mr. Abdullah, are you there?
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. In the interest of time, I'll speed up my reading. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, for giving me this opportunity again to share my thoughts on the impacts of post-COVID-19 on globalization, economic trade development, and democratic freedom, globally in general and in Malaysia in particular. For over 8 months, we have been battling the deadly COVID-19 virus and its mutations. No one was spared. Every human being, regardless of age, color, or religion, are its target. As in all wars, the impact of this pandemic is devastating. The UNTAD report published in June 2021 noted that the most devastating impact is to international tourism. It is estimated that for 2020 and 2021, the global GDP loss is more than USD 4 trillion for the industry and its closely linked sectors. The report warns that the sector's recovery in the next few years will largely depend on how fast the vaccines are rolled out. International tourism is the lifeline for every country, providing millions with jobs. It is critical for developing countries, especially to speed up their vaccine rollout if they wish to restart their country's tourism industry. The US Congressional Research Service report of July 21 stated that the overall global trade is estimated to have fallen by 5.3% in 2020, but is projected to grow by 8.0% this year. Therefore, advanced economies, which comprise 60% of global economic activity, are expected to operate below their potential output level until at least 2024, which indicates lower national and individual economic welfare relative to the pre-pandemic levels. In developing countries, which would include the ASEAN countries, outbreaks of new viral variants could prolong the pandemic and dampen prospects of recovery. However, it is also interesting to note that the booming e-commerce industry has sparked off an increasing in shipping costs. McKinsey's briefing note on COVID-19 dated 25th August this year reported that sending a container from Asia to Europe or US, which used to cost approximately USD $2,000 before the pandemic, is now $12,000 more. They expect demand to remain high in the coming months as retailers and other suppliers of e-commerce prepare for the coming holiday season. The pandemic has also seen some positives in that it has pushed several companies to fast forward its buttons on digital access, highlighted the importance of training and upskilling its workforce, provided companies with the perfect opportunity to innovate while seeing a rise in productive levels, with employees having a more flexible work from home arrangements. Ladies and gentlemen, Malaysia is one of the most open economies in the world, with a trade to GDP ratio averaging over 130% since 2010. Openness to trade and investment has been instrumental in employment creation and income growth, with about 40% of jobs in Malaysia linked to export activities. Malaysia's economy has been on an upward trajectory, averaging a growth of 5.4% since 2010, and is expected to achieve its transition from an upper middle income economy to a high income economy by 2024. The Malaysian economy was hit hardest during the implementation of the first MCO, or Movement Control Order, equivalent to the lockdown last year, when the economy dipped to minus 70%. Our full GDP growth for 2020 was recorded as minus 5.6% compared to positive 4.4% in 2019. Since the implementation of the second MCO earlier this year, followed by the current third MCO or lockdown by the central bank has now projected a GDP growth at only 4.4% for 2021. With the fast rollout of the vaccine immunization program, which is expected to vaccinate 80% of its population by February 22 next year, or earlier, so as to achieve herd immunity, many economists believe that this remains key to a full economic recovery. As at August 31st this year, more than 35 million vaccine doses have been administered to its 32.7 million population, at the rate of 374,000 vaccine doses administered each day, the highest among the highest in the world. We expect to achieve full vaccination of 7%, or rather 80% by May next year. On the political front, we see the passing out of baton from former Prime Minister Muhyiddin Yassin to his deputy Ismail Sabri. Ismail Sabri, incidentally, is the third Prime Minister for Malaysia during the pandemic time. Before this, Dr. Mahathir was a minister elected from the 2018 general election, followed by Muhyiddin Yassin, and Ismail Sabri took place just about a month ago. The impact of COVID-19 on democratic freedom. Finally, allow me to comment briefly on the effect of the pandemic to democratic freedom. I note the growing problem of weakening democracy across several countries since the pandemic. The most noticeable is the growing role of governments in implementing new laws without consulting citizens under their declared emergency status. It is understandable that governments must act to protect their citizens, but this action is related directly to the limitation of freedom. To curb the spread of virus, every country imposed lockdowns and control movements, thus restraining civil liberties. Citizens are subjected to mandatory quarantine at home, a duty to inform the police when they plan to travel interstate, and to postpone official events. Citizens are forced to give their government free access to their personal information, bank accounts, and family histories, as well as to accept new laws in the country. In conclusion, ladies and gentlemen, I would like to leave you with one question. Can democracy survive in the pandemic, or has it become an outdated, useless system which is not sufficient to protect citizens? Thank you.
Choose the economic recovery in the next few years will largely depend on how fast the vaccines are rolled out. Thank you very much. The next gentleman is from Burma, Myanmar, Mr. Zaban. Mr. Zaban, are you ready? The floor is yours. Okay, please, Mr. Zaban.
Hello, here, yes.
Oh, yes, stop.
Okay,
please.
yes. Honorable Chairman, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen, by the grace of God, all of us present this afternoon for the 2021 Asia Pacific Virtual Roundtable Conference should consider ourselves as being very fortunate to survive this pandemic. Today, I will talk about the situation that Myanmar is going through with the COVID-19 pandemic, while still being ruled under the Burmese military without basic human rights and civil rights and still fighting for its freedom. In 2020, the first week of the COVID-19 pandemic hit the country, during which disease did not affect the entire country. However, in September, it got worse, and despite that, in November of 2020, the general election was still held, in which another party that is led by Ms. Aung San Suu Kyi won the general election. The military party was quite unsatisfied with the results, and its leader, Min Aung Hlaing, consolidated their power by the use of weapons on the 1st of February. The Burmese military leaders feel the need to prevent the formation of the federal union, as that would be the end of Burmanization, and the Burmese general will lose the power to dominate the ethnic people. The problem in Myanmar is that leaders of Burmese are rejecting the democratic form of government and the federalism of non-Burman ethnic people. This is not the first time that military has seized the power from the democratic government. In 1885, Myanmar was under the British colonization till 1948. At that time, General Aung San demanded independence. However, the British demanded Panlong Agreement. This agreement, unlike the King and Norato Agreement, did not have the theory of eliminating every ethnic group, but rather to create equality in the country for every ethnic group. And that was strongly opposed by the Burmese leader. So as a result, General Aung San was assassinated. In 1962, when people were demanding the implementing of the Panlong Agreement and federal form of government, General Ne Win declared military coup as he rejected the federal form of government. At the moment, the country is experiencing not just the pandemic, but the military dictatorship. A lot of people have joined together to fight against this dictatorship. The military authority rigged to strike by demonstrators by ruthlessly killing, torture, raping, looting, and burning down their houses and villages. After 5 months, since the coup took over, the third wave of the COVID-19 pandemic and more suffering to the Myanmar people. The political prisoners who are prisoned and infected with the virus are dying without any treatment. Instead of protecting the people and preventing the disease, they are intentionally spreading the disease throughout the country. In reality, without peace, there is no point in talking about the economic trade development or globalization in Myanmar. As long as the military dictatorship still exists, there is no hope, since the economy's power will still be in the hands of the military government and not to the common people. These justifiable actions are the reasons why the Kachin people established the Kachin Independent Organization, KIO, Kachin Independence Army, KIA, to achieve the human rights and equal opportunity for ethnic nationalities. At first, the Burmese people were not on the same page with this organization, but the fact that the army's ability turned against their own people has resulted in the Burmese people to realize the suffering of non-Burmese ethnic people at the hands of the Burmese army in the past 60 years, and they now sympathize with the ethnic people. Now, the non-Burmese ethnic group and Burmese people have joined hands to bring down the military government. If both groups sincerely support one another and trust each other, they can successfully defeat the military government. On the 16th of April 2021, the NLD leaders who will be able to script the arrest formed the National Unity Government, NUG, with its objective to form federal democracy government and give a promise to settle the protracted problem of non-Burmese ethnic people. This September 2021, NUG will contest its membership in the UN with a military coup regime. If UN accepts its membership, then NUG will become a legal government of Myanmar. Non-Burmese people appreciate the policy of NUG, but whether they will truly implement their policy or not, we have to see. If they feel that completely with federalism, non-Burma people will never be persuaded again for a union of Burma. Also, the new democratic government should recognize the self-determination of the Burmese ethnic group. Moreover, the new generations are fighting to bring in change, which is sign of hope in Myanmar. These new generations youth are the ones who will become tomorrow's leaders. Ladies and gentlemen, I hope that by now you are aware of the situation in Myanmar. Please pray and support Myanmar to overcome this difficult period. On behalf of the people of Myanmar, I humbly request you to help us achieve our goals, restoring peace, justice, and freedom democracy in Myanmar. When a military regime is defeated one for all by the people who stand for democracy and federalism, that will be the only solution for peace and development in the country. We must strive to transform Myanmar into a democratic country as federal democracy in order to peace and stability can be achieved. Yes, and then therefore we really need support from ABLD and WLD and international community to fight the military government. Thank you very much.
From Nepal, Mr. Kusan, please.
Well, good afternoon and namaste from Nepal. Honorable President Yao Yingchi, distinguished participants, ladies and gentlemen.
Could you raise a little bit your voice? Raise it up, your sound.
At the outset, I would like to offer my sincere thanks to Honorable President Yao Yingchi of WLFD, headquarters Taiwan, and Honorable Chairman Sing Yung Chan of APLFD for inviting Nepal chapter to participate in the Asia Pacific virtual roundtable on the impacts of COVID-19 on globalization, economic trade, development, and democratic freedoms. Known as an unprecedented pandemic, COVID-19 affected the health, economy, and freedoms of people in the world. Almost all countries of this world have been severely affected because of the infection of coronavirus. Millions of people have lost their families, friends, and relatives within a short span of time. Due to the pandemic, economic activities were locked, movement of people was barred, transportation system was closed, and imposition of lockdown became common. Nepal has experienced exceptionally bitter situation, facing many difficulties. As the precautionary measures to avoid COVID-19 spread, the government of Nepal closed its borders, restricted traveling within neighboring countries in 2020 and 2021 for a certain period of time. The resulted serious effects in the import and export of goods. As per the report of World Bank, Nepal's economy is projected to grow by only 0.6% in 2021 as lockdowns disrupted economic activities. The COVID-19 outbreak has the hardest hit in the tourism sector. Mountaineering was suspended, airlines services were halted for months, tour and travel offices were shut down. As being the fifth most remittance-dependent country, Nepal's 25% GDP comes from remittance remitted by 3.8 million Nepali laborers. COVID-19 has narrowed down the remittance flow. It was identified that most of the trade and industry-related businesses struggled to meet their operational expenditure due to the fall in the market demand induced by pandemic. 25% of Nepali population is under poverty line. The marginalized people suffered a lot from losing employment. COVID-19 in Nepal gave rise to economic instability, health inequalities, and social disparities. more than 10,800 persons were died who were severely infected. Due to the limited quantity of ventilators in the hospitals, many patients of having severe respiratory syndromes died. Some of our friendly countries, such as India, China, and USA, have provided vaccines to Nepal free of cost, but it was not sufficient as required. Government of Nepal also procured vaccines. At the present moment, federal government is providing vaccines to the rest of population across the country. The government has focused its priority to combat with the pandemic in case the third wave of COVID hits Nepal. COVID-19 contributed to increased stigma and psychological trauma. Those who were found positive after PCR tests were treated with unhealthy behaviors by their relatives and friends as well. Social discrimination among people increased. In 2020-21, more than 7,000 suicidal cases were recorded. At the same time, domestic violence also occurred. In order to strengthen democracy, the WLFD Nepal chapter has suggested to the government and political parties of Nepal to keep their vigilant eyes on protecting the freedoms and fundamental rights of each and every citizen of the country during and after the COVID-19 pandemic. However, the pandemic became the major factor for declining the economic growth of a country, but there is also an opportunity to open new vistas of development. Let's join our hands together to develop our economy and protect democratic freedoms and human rights. Let's join our hands to build a healthy world, healthy Nepal, and a healthy Taiwan. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you to see our new friend. Take good care of yourself, please. And the next gentleman we are invited is Mr. Jiang Wu, Deputy Chairman APLFD New Zealand chapter. Jiang, please.
Okay, thank you very much. Everyone can hear me?
Yeah, very clear. Please go on.
Okay. Good afternoon, Honorable Chairman and Honorable the Council Chairman, Mr. Chen, and dear chapter delegates, good friends. Very pleased that our Member of Parliament of New Zealand, Mr. Simon O'Connell, become our keynote speech for today. For the New Zealand chapter report, since last year, New Zealand had the general election on the 17th October 2020. The Labour Party won the 2020 election in a landslide victory, 54.16%. So they got enough seats to govern along, since the MMP means mixed member proportion representation system was introduced in 1996. And this year, New Zealand is hosting the 2021 APEC meeting from December last year until November 2021, because the world is suffering the effects of COVID-19. So all of APEC 2021 is to be held virtually, like the conference forum meeting we are having now. It will be held with approximately 3,000 government officials from 21 APEC economies. They are focusing in COVID-19 recovery, trade, food security, etc. On the 16th of July, had an informal leaders retreat, which was chaired by the Prime Minister of New Zealand, Jacinda Ardern. A joint statement released after the conclusion of the meeting, with the leaders promising to redouble our efforts to expand vaccine manufacture and supply, support global vaccine sharing efforts, and encourage production technologies on mutual agreed terms. And the APEC meeting will be closed after the Leaders Week in early November 2021. The second part is Afghanistan crisis. New Zealand evacuate New Zealanders, their families, and those who have helped New Zealand efforts in Afghanistan. The first group returned back to New Zealand on the 23rd of August, and until the 31st August, New Zealand has evacuated total 390 people from Afghanistan. New Zealand and diplomatic relationship, especially China. The Minister of Foreign Affairs, Ms. Mahuta, said in a wide-ranging foreign policy speech on the 6th of July, 2021, New Zealand was committed to protecting and promoting human rights around the world. Continue to make good on our reputation for standing up with others to speak out when we see human rights under threat. And New Zealand valued the Five Eyes relationship. It is a security and intelligence framework from which we can work with trusted allies on those specific issues. But the human rights community is much broader than that. We don't need the Five Eyes to articulate where we stand on human rights issues. New Zealand would need to strengthen its relationship across the region in the coming years. She said trade is important. So is regional peace and stability. New Zealand also rolls out more COVID-19 supports for the Pacific. New Zealand provided COVID-19 vaccines to Cook Islands, newer and more Pacific island nations. These deliveries will reach at least 1.2 million people in the region in the coming year. The New Zealand government also announced that $120 million has been reprioritized to support Pacific Island countries to weather the economic storm caused by the pandemic. Much of the new package is tagged for Fiji, Papua New Guinea, which are both battling outbreaks of COVID-19, but some is also being sent to Samoa, Tonga, and Tuvalu. COVID-19 in New Zealand. The first case of this disease in New Zealand was reported on 28th of February last year, and we have experienced level 4, level 3, level 2, then down to level 1. There were no COVID-19 cases in the community from the 28th February this year up to the 17th of August. But in April, May this year, New Zealand opened its bubble to Australia and the Cook Islands, where travelers would not require managed isolation upon arrival to New Zealand. This was the first step to open New Zealand to the rest of the world. But unfortunately, Delta, the virus, found its way into New Zealand. The whole country immediately jumped from level 1 back into level 4 when the first community case of Delta was detected on the 17th August. Currently, like today, we only found 11 new cases, and the total active case up to date is 617, including 590 in the community and 27 is returning from overseas. And we are very lucky, God bless. We only have 27 now stay in the hospital, and only 27 people pass away since the first case last year up to now. And the vaccine in New Zealand can be administered to the people aged 12 years and over. And the total population of New Zealand is 5.1 million. And up to date is a fully vaccinated is already reached 32%, and have only received the first dose injection, 31%, and unvaccinated population, 36%. And New Zealand is one of the few countries in the world that has demonstrated a COVID elimination strategy. We prefer using sharp and short instead of light and long. Business who rely heavily on international travel, tourism, and hospitality, international education were serious impact. Some of them are restructuring or have to be forced to shut down. Small business such as restaurant or cafe have received government wage subsidies during the lockdown period. Once alert level dropped to level 2, they were gradually able to restart their business and were able to return to normality. In conclusion, when we are talking human rights, freedom, and democracy, shall we consider how to save the limited public health facilities, the medical resources for those people they are really need to save their life, fighting for their last breath? Shall we protect ourselves under the safe and healthy instead of make us become the channel of passing the virus to other innocent people around us in the community? Sooner or later, the economy, the business will be recovered. But if unfortunately caught COVID-19, lost our life, then that is completely finished. That is the end. May God bless you all. May God protect the whole world. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor John Wood. Your report is very comprehensive and informative. Thanks again. The next gentleman is Santiago Mascarenhas. Please. Are you online? Okay. Turn on your speaker. Turn on your speaker. We can hear you.
Hello. Hello. Do you hear me? Okay. 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 Yes, I'll cut it short. Honorable Yao Eng Chi, Honorable Cheng Yung Chuan, esteemed colleagues, friends. The Philippine chapter is extending its greetings to the 2021 APRFD Video Roundtable. We are happy to be invited and to participate in this prestigious gathering in spite of the pandemic. The Philippine chapter has already submitted its report to the Secretariat. In view of recent developments, we are updating this report. As of September 9, 2021, the COVID-19 tally of the Philippines cases are as follows. New cases, 28,820. Active cases, 166,672. Deaths for the day, 61, for a total of 34,733. Recoveries for the day is 12,337 as against the total of 1,960,487 for a total of 2,161,892 cases since the pandemic started in the Philippines. The new case of 28,000 represents the highest in any single day since the pandemic started in March 2020. In our report, we mentioned that the government, through the IATF, that is the Interagency Task Force for the Prevention of Infectious Diseases, downgraded the quarantine status of Metro Manila and the nearby provinces from the restrictive, modified, enhanced community quarantine, MECQ, to the more lenient General Community Quarantine, GCQ, from September 8 up to the end of the month. Businesses which have been reeling from the 18 months of pandemic welcome the move and prepared for the resumption of operation. This entails the purchase of raw materials and the summoning of long furloughed workers. Suddenly, the government turned around and extended the MACQ up to the end of the month. The move have negative effects, specifically on the food service industries and its workers. The implementation of the COVID response, likewise, is now being challenged due to the alleged irregularities like the overpriced acquisition of face mask, face shield, and personal protective equipment, PPE. These issues have caught fire in view of the coming elections next year. In the matter of trade development, while some of the big businesses made money last year, most of the small and medium-scale businesses lost money and have to lay off workers. The SMSEs comprise about 85% of the business sector. While we are trying to comply with the restrictions imposed by the government, people are now clamoring for more material and financial aid. While Metro Manila is nearing about 40% vaccination rate, we hope that the national and local governments hasten the pace of vaccination so that the economy can reopen. So lastly, the Philippine chapter would like to thank India chapter and the APLFD and World League for extending its condolences to our President General Fred Ruiz. Thank you.
Story already through your office. But take good care of yourself. Hopefully everybody got safe, good. And the last gentleman is Mr. Simon Hu. He's the Deputy Secretary General of APLFD, I'm sorry. Please, you are, okay.
Can you hear me? Papa Blacksheet? Good. Okay.
Ginanong ba ako?
Just cut the long story
Yung
short.
tinuktok ako. Hindi, no, kasi mabilis ako.
Sakto 5 minutes.
Cut the long story short. Just you might have to read my report, my full report from the Secretariat Office, and I'm here just to say thank you to all the people that make this possible. Our moderator, Ambassador David Liu, Council Chairman Deng Yongquan, Secretary General Peter Lee, and the Secretary staff, people like Rochelle, Cher, Akron, and all of them. And also my condolence to our party, Santiago, to the loss of General Luis. I personally worked with the Philippine chapter for a long time, all the way from the earliest General Santos and come down to all the way at least 5 or 6. We lost 5 or 6 people from there. And without further ado, I would like to return the mic to the moderator to summarize roundtable. Thank you very much.
Thank you for your short report. We wish you have good time. And it looks very hot in Singapore right now. Is that right?
Yeah, okay. But we still survive.
Yun ang Philippines.
COVID-19 will not be our last crisis. We will sure encounter more trial on the road ahead. We will be tested again and again, and even sometimes can be very severe.
Okay.
My children was wondering what their parents and grandparents would do. Will we survive? Will Singapore prevail? Will Singaporeans stay together as one people? We did it before, and we will do it again. Thank you.
Thank you. Now around all the time. Thank you for all gentlemen, ladies' participation for this forum and roundtable conference. Wave your hand and say goodbye. See you next time.
See you next time. Okay. See you.
See you next time.
See you next time.
See you in person next time.
Yeah.
See you next time. Goodbye.
Next year.
Bye. Thank you for your time.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye bye.